right, everybody, I'm back and took a little vacation. I did. We just got back from a cruise and it was awesome and a little sun, little fun. It's gonna get hard not used to not having old fashioned at 4 o'clock every day, but I'm back. So, what do I have today for you? Last couple of weeks we've been talking about payers. I'm going to continue on that trend. I got sent in a nice little so feeding some information, if you will. So I was out, so not sure what's going on. I tried to decompress and unplug, if you will. My friend Casey sent me a link to just in my home state. So this is good. The link to an article around Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan and them charging for appeals, which is fascinating on so many levels. But I want to break it down into a few different things. If you haven't heard this yet, I guess in 21 they started putting it into different contracts, which is I think is also an interesting point. And they're saying is that they put them into contracts, but they haven't enforced it until now. And now they're saying they're going to enforce it. And my theory is I think it's a technique. And if I think about a technique of like, I'm going to negotiate with hospitals, or let's just say payers or the providers. Negotiate with providers. I'm going to negotiate in a whole myriad of topics, and not just topics, but obviously what they're going to pay, right? So reimbursement and topics, and the hospital's going to have to manage kind of all the different versions of topics that they're going to have to like decide in which little battle they're going to win. If you think of battles versus wars, right? And think points they're going to give up on, right? You're not going to get everything in negotiation. Of course, we know that. But is fascinating is my guess is what's happening here is there's a little bit of like, oh, we're going to implement this thing now, but don't worry, it's probably never going to get implemented. We're never going to actually do it, but we want it in there. And it's like, oh, you give that up, right? So you give it up as a negotiation point, and then later it comes back and then you don't even think about it, right? My guess is most groups probably, like, if they allowed it, it was like, okay, fine, but you're giving up this other piece, right? And if they allowed it, then they probably weren't even thinking that it would happen. This is also, I think, this like really kind of Trojan horse way of kind of like, we're going to get this thing in there and maybe even bury it in some other language. I haven't seen the contract, so I can't say. And then eventually what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on and we're going to use that as a lever we're going to pull to prevent you from appealing more. Now, their argument is that, and again, this is what they're saying, is that 85% of external second-level appeals are upheld by the company's original decision. I cannot and will not believe that number is accurate until they show some real data, because I think what we're seeing on the other side is the total opposite of that. And so I don't know where they're getting their numbers from or their data. Like, who knows? They're just coming up with a statement, right? But I don't believe that to be true. It can't be true. Even just based on what we're seeing from hospital level data saying this is what was denied. Now, what they're calling a second level appeal and like maybe they're just really qualifying it is my guess is what's happening. But to say that they're going to now charge for any of those is interesting in its own right? Because it kind of, and again, they have not said how much they're going to charge. So my guess is that's very dependent on what was in the contract. Again, if this is $25, okay, who cares? Like $50, like that's irrelevant. But it's the kind of the point of like, well, what if it's $2,000? What if it's $3,000 or $5,000 or God forbid, maybe more than that, right? In a large claim. The other aspect of this, which is, I think, again, Blue Cross just loses sight of, or I would say just payers in general, is that the burden is completely on the hospital. And I say that because it's totally free for them as in the payers, is free to deny a claim. It is not free to appeal it. And so there is this administrative burden where, and I say that for those of you who don't understand, like majority of claims that go through, they go through electronic. It's anywhere estimated from 70 to 80% of all claims don't touch a human hand on both sides, right? Like if we did, we'd be in a world of hurt. Because there's just a sheer volume number, right? There's a sheer volume number of like how many claims. And so if you think about like majority of those don't get touched, but on the other side, if they create algorithms or in some cases AI, which they've of course used, and there's a big lawsuit now with United, and they're going to use, there's no doubt about it. And I actually think it could be a really good way to use AI if it's used the right way, right? Like there's good uses of it. They could use that just to figure out like, hey, it's missing these things, right? Like that's an easy, what I usually call technical denial. It's these clinical denials that get very squirrely, right? The technical denials, you're missing something, or you had this code mixed with this code and it didn't match, and it's all algorithm based. These clinical denials are much larger. So if you get like a really complex, it's like a complex account, you've done a bunch of work on your side. It's complex, right? Like person stayed 2 weeks, let's say, 3 weeks. There's a lot of comorbidities, a lot of things happening, right? You're documenting, you're trying to get everything in line. You're trying to follow whatever rules they've decided for clinical guidelines, which, by the way, keep changing, not Blue Cross particularly, like just in general. The payers keep changing whatever one they're going to follow, which has its own issues, right? And you've done that, you've sent it in, and they could literally just decide if it hits a certain complexity level or a certain dollar amount, they could just deny it. They don't have to have a reason. There's no like, oh, you denied it and you shouldn't have, and it was your mistake, and now you owe us more money because you held it. That's not happening. Now there's a whole thing with like interest payments, which I have a whole group of friends that are working on that, and I think that's fascinating because that'll come up as a point of negotiation for sure in the future. So we've got that issue. But the burden then is completely on the hospital to pay for whatever it costs to actually go appeal the account. And again, on the payer side, they don't even have to look at it and they could still deny it until it gets to the second level. So I'm not saying they're being nefarious in doing this, but it doesn't cost them anything to get to the second level. It does not. And so again, what happens here is the burden is on the hospital to continue to do. And so the hospital's been working hard, and many of you are on this side, they've been working hard to automate some of these functions so that they can appeal every single claim, which is what I would tell everyone to do, appeal everything. Because the numbers actually don't vary that much, depending on no matter how much volume you appeal. Let's say you used to appeal 60%, now you appeal 100%. The amount of overturned is roughly the same percentage-wise, which should point to lots of problems, not just problems on your end, problems on the other end. So it doesn't really matter. But my point would be that the insurers can get away with like almost doing nothing until they get to a second level, which then if they win, they're going to charge you. It goes back to my point from a couple weeks ago or even last week. I can't remember when I said it. So I was on vacation last week, as you know. My point is that insurers and payers are big banks. They treat themselves, that's how they actually make money, is they hold your money, or in this case, mostly employers' money, for as long as they can. Because the longer they hold it, the more interest they make. So, and again, the system is set up for incentive for them to hold it. The fastest and easiest way for them to hold money is to deny claims that are much larger and complex, that aren't simple, right? And again, I'm not saying this is like nefariously done. It's just this is the way the incentives are set up. They are a large bank, and they're basically saying, we're going to cover some care, and we're going to pay those out. On a majority of basis, they're paying out, right? The problem is we're in healthcare, the margins are so slim. This is a low margin industry. And most of us have not wanted to like recognize that it's a low margin industry. On both sides, probably. I'm not saying that they have this high margin industry. I don't think they do. But we're definitely in a low margin business. And so when you're in a low margin business, you got to make sure all those things are super tight. You can't have where you're doing second and third level appeals with lots of people involved. Otherwise, you're spending way too much money to collect, and you won't do it on any balances that are lower than a certain amount, right? So anyways, I don't know what's going to happen with this. I found it fascinating. That's my rant for the week. Lots of stuff going on. We did an Indiana HFMA live podcast with my friend Madi and David Kelly, and that was super fun. And thanks everybody for having us out. That's going to come live this week, or maybe already did. Thank you, Rome. And we got some other stuff we're recording. I know we've been a little bit slow on recording this year. It's taking a little bit for me to get moving, but we're going to get moving. We're doing a bunch of interviews. I'm doing my Rev Cycle 101 course, which is going to be awesome. There's still spots. I wasn't sure I was going to do it, but there are spots available. That first one is March 7th. So you got a little less than 2 weeks for you to sign up. It is geared towards asking dumb questions, learning from others. It's going to be super fun. I'm going to have my friend Doug, a CFO. I have a VP of Rev Cycle. I've got another friend coming to do coding HIM. It's going to be awesome. I don't know if I'll ever do it again. So this will be the one shot. We'll see what happens. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week. Send in your questions or comments.